Tomorrow morning, a small rectangle of glass is going to scream at you. You will reach for it in the dark, you will silence it. You will lie there for a few seconds resenting it, and then you will get up, because that is the arrangement you have made with your own life. So ask yourself something simple. Before that rectangle existed, before any of it existed, how did anyone get anywhere on time? The easy answer is roosters. The easy answer is sunlight. The easy answer is that life moved slower back then, and nobody really minded being late. But the real answer is far stranger. For almost all of human history, waking up was not a problem that needed solving. It was a skill. A quiet, unremarkable, universal skill. And you still have it. You have simply stopped noticing that you do. Start somewhere the stakes were absolute. A medieval monastery, in the middle of the night, in the middle of winter. Monks were required to rise in the blackest part of the night to sing. Not at dawn, hours before dawn, at the office called vigils. This was not optional. The entire purpose of the community was built on the promise that somewhere in the world, at that exact hour, someone was awake and praying. So how did they do it? Partly with technology. Candles marked with rings burned down at a known rate. Water clocks dripped from one vessel into another, and when the water reached a certain level, a weight dropped or a bell tipped. Partly with people. Monasteries assigned one brother the job of staying awake and rousing everyone else, walking the cold corridors with a lamp, shaking shoulders in the dark. But mostly, they did it by expecting to. That last part is the piece that gets left out of the story, and it turns out to be the whole story. Hold on to it, because it comes back. Move forward 1,000 years, and the problem changes completely. The Industrial Revolution arrives in Britain, and for the first time, enormous numbers of people have to be somewhere at a precise hour that has nothing to do with the sun. The mill starts at 5:30. The gates close. Arrive late and you lose the shift, or the job, or the room you rent with the wages from the job. Clocks existed. Most working families could not afford one, and the ones they could afford were unreliable. So a job appeared that sounds invented, the knocker up. A knocker up walked the streets in the hours before dawn, carrying a long pole, sometimes 12 or 15 feet, and tapped on the upstairs windows of paying customers. Tap, tap, tap. Wait for movement behind the glass. Move on. Some carried a rattle. Some carried a pea shooter and fired dried peas at the panes of the higher windows. One of the most photographed was Mary Smith, who worked the streets of Limehouse in East London with a pea shooter and a list of names. She was still doing it well into the 20th century. In parts of northern England and Ireland, knocker-ups were still working in the 1950s, walking past houses that already had electric alarm clocks inside them. And every child who hears this story asks the same question. Who woke up the knocker-up? The practical answer is that some worked in pairs, and some slept in the afternoon, and some barely slept at all. But the real answer is the one that matters here. The knocker-up woke up on time because waking up on time was something a human body could do, reliably, night after night, for a lifetime, without any device at all. Which raises a harder question. If that ability is normal, why does it feel so alien to you? Because the night you sleep through is not the night your ancestors slept through. In the 1990s, a historian at Virginia Tech named A. Roger Ekirch was researching the history of nighttime and kept tripping over a phrase he could not explain. First sleep. He found it in court depositions, in diaries, in medical guides, in poems, in Chaucer, in Cervantes. Then he found its partner, second sleep. Over years of archive work, he collected hundreds of references across centuries and across languages, all describing the same thing. People went to bed a couple of hours after dark. They slept. They woke around midnight, And then, for an hour or two, they were simply awake in the dark. They prayed. They talked. They mended things by firelight. They visited neighbors. Medical texts of the period recommended it as the best time to conceive a child. Then they lay back down and slept again until morning. Nobody wrote it down as a discovery because nobody thought it was unusual. You do not explain breathing. And that could have stayed a historical curiosity, interesting, unprovable, filed away. Except somebody had already tested it, by accident. At the National Institute of Mental Health, a psychiatrist named Thomas Ware ran an experiment in the early 1990s that was almost brutally simple. He took volunteers and gave them 14 hours of darkness every night for weeks. No lamps, no screens, no firelight. Roughly the length of a winter night before artificial light existed. For the first few nights, they slept enormously, paying off a debt they did not know they had. And then something reorganized itself. Their sleep split in two. A block of sleep. A long, calm interval of wakefulness in the middle of the night. Then a second block of sleep. Exactly the shape Ekirch had been pulling out of dusty court records, appearing spontaneously in modern people inside a laboratory. The interval was not restless. Blood tests showed elevated prolactin, a hormone associated with deep calm, the kind of quiet, drifting, non-anxious state people spend a lot of money trying to reach on purpose. So sit with that for a second. If you wake at 3 a.m. and lie there with your heart going, convinced something is wrong with you, it is worth considering that nothing is malfunctioning. An older timetable is trying to run, and the only thing that has changed is that you now interpret it as failure. But none of this explains the deeper mystery. A rooster explains dawn. Firelight explains midnight. Neither explains how a knocker-up woke at 4, or how a monk woke at 2, or how you sometimes open your eyes 90 seconds before your alarm on the morning of a flight. For that, you have to go inside. In 1729, a French scientist named Jean-Jacques d'Orthez de Meuron was watching a mimosa plant. Its leaves opened during the day and folded at night, which everyone assumed was a simple reaction to sunlight. So he put the plant in a dark cupboard. The leaves kept opening and closing on schedule. In total darkness, with no sun to follow, the plant was still keeping time. The clock was not outside the plant. The clock was inside it. That single cupboard experiment took 2.5 centuries to fully explain. Deep in your brain, in the hypothalamus, sitting just above the point where your optic nerves cross, there is a cluster of around 20,000 neurons called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It is roughly the size of a grain of rice. It is the master clock of your entire body, and every organ you own runs on a schedule it sets. In 2017, Jeffrey Hall, Michael Rosbash, and Michael Young were awarded the Nobel Prize for showing how that clock actually ticks at the molecular level. A gene builds a protein. The protein accumulates through the night. When enough of it piles up, it switches its own gene off. Then it degrades through the day. The gene switches back on, and the cycle starts again. An hourglass made of protein, turning over inside almost every cell you have. And here is the strange part. Left completely alone, with no sunrise and no sunset, that clock does not run at exactly 24 hours. Work led by Charles Czeisler at Harvard put the human cycle at roughly 24 hours and 11 minutes. Close, but not exact. Which is precisely why morning light matters so much. Every day, light nudges the clock back into alignment with the planet. So you have a clock. Your ancestors had the same clock. But a clock that tells the hour is still not an alarm. Something has to decide to wake you. That experiment was run in Germany. Jan Born and his colleagues, then at the University of Lübeck, published a result in Nature in 1999 that should be far more famous than it is. Volunteers slept in a lab. Some were told they would be woken at 6 in the morning. Others were told they would be woken at 9. The 9 group was lied to. They were woken at 6 as well. The researchers tracked a hormone called adrenocorticotropin, which triggers the release of cortisol, the chemical that ramps your body up for the day. In the volunteers who expected to wake at 6, that hormone began climbing about an hour beforehand. Their bodies started the launch sequence at 5 in the morning, while they were still fast asleep. In the volunteers who expected to sleep until 9, there was no rise at all. They were dragged out of sleep instead of rising out of it. Read that again, because it is the answer to the question you started with. Your body can prepare to wake you, but it needs to be told when. An intention, held in your mind as you fall asleep, reaches down into a system you have no conscious access to and sets a timer in your bloodstream. The monk knew what hour he was needed. The knocker-up knew his round started at 4. And a full hour before either of them opened their eyes, their own chemistry was already quietly turning the lights on. It is why you wake up minutes before the alarm on the days that actually matter. It is why you snap awake at your usual hour on the first morning of a holiday, annoyed, with nowhere to be. So what did the alarm clock actually change? Not your ability to wake. That was never missing. In 1787, a man named Levi Hutchins in Concord, New Hampshire, built himself a personal alarm clock that could only ring at 4 in the morning, because 4 in the morning was when he got up, and it did not occur to him that anyone would need it to ring at any other time. He never patented it. In 1847, a Frenchman named Antoine Redier patented an alarm you could actually set to a time of your choosing. Then came factories, railways, standardized time zones, and the shared fiction that everyone in a region is living in the same minute. What the alarm clock changed is that your waking stopped belonging to you. Your internal clock still runs. It is still keeping its own time, still turning its protein hourglass over in the dark. But it is no longer allowed to finish. The alarm cuts in wherever it lands, often in the middle of a cycle, which is why you can wake up feeling worse than when you went to bed. The fog that follows has a name: sleep inertia. And the snooze button, that small mercy you press 3 times, drops you back into the beginning of a cycle you will never be allowed to complete. The German chronobiologist Till Ronenberg has a term for the gap between the time your body wants to wake and the time your schedule demands it. He calls it social jet lag. Most of the industrialized world lives with it permanently, flying across time zones every single week without ever leaving the bedroom. Your ancestors had no clocks and woke on time. You have a clock in your pocket, accurate to the microsecond, and you have never felt more tired. Tomorrow morning, that small rectangle of glass is going to scream at you. Only now, you know what it is really doing. It is not waking you up. Something far older started that job an hour ago, quietly, in the dark, without asking. The screaming is just an interruption. And it is worth wondering what you would hear in that hour before dawn, if you ever let it finish.